Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice. Those of us who drive a car, that's most of us, will know that the car runs better if you put the right fuel into it. Makes sense. Most petrol stations or gasoline stations in the US have a number of different options when it comes to filling up your tank. With unleaded, 91, 95, 98, there might be diesel, some cars run on LPG, and of course there are cars that run on electricity. Put diesel into the proverbial Ferrari, it's not going to run very well. And it's a pretty rare day, I would have thought, that anybody would deliberately do that. Because you know how it's going to end for you, and probably end for you sitting at the side of the road waiting for a tow truck. And it's probably going to be expensive too. When we go to the supermarket and put food into our trolley, we actually collectively, and some people obviously are very, very good at this, but some of us are not so good, and probably most of us can get better. But when we go to the supermarket and put food into our trolleys, eventually that food is going to go into us. It fuels our bodies. And it should not come as a great surprise, but often it does, that if we don't put the right fuels into our bodies may not run quite that well. And we've certainly seen over the last 40 years, and some would argue 50 years, that there's been a significant increase in chronic diseases, and that includes heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and an assortment of forms of cancer. And nobody's quite worked out why that is. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the new Secretary of Health and Human Services in the US, and I accept that he's not everybody's cup of tea, he doesn't have to be, and you don't have to agree with everything that a man or a woman says to recognise that they're onto something major. Kennedy has said, why is nobody asking about the increase in chronic disease and what is causing it? And my personal view is that nobody really wants to find out, because there is a lot more money in treating illness than in people being healthy. So there's a whole host of vested interests that, and a lot of this is driven through big public health, whole lot of vested interests that sort of cry, a little bit of crocodile tears about, it's really sad that, we're seeing this increase in chronic disease, and, isn't it terrible? And that's about where it ends. Because if we really drill down into it, our food chain, and Kennedy is onto this, and he is looking at the influence of big food corporations and big agricultural corporations, and that includes those involved in fertilizers and chemicals in the US, as to what contribution that is making. And it's not the only cause, but it's a fairly major cause. If we don't put the right fuels into our car, it's going to break down. If we don't put the right fuels into our body, there's going to be some problems down the track. Now, surprise, surprise, work has been done which doesn't make the front page because it's not a new pharmaceutical, so you don't hear about it from big public health or the government. Diets which have quite a lot of plant foods and animal foods may enhance healthy ageing. There's been a lot of work done on the Mediterranean diet, and again, it's a term that people haven't absolutely defined, but essentially it's vegetables, olive oil, fruit, nuts, seeds, berries, some meat, fish, chicken, and to the shock horror of big public health, includes the true Mediterranean diet, the one that's been studied the most, actually includes a glass of red wine. And no, it's not mandatory. If you don't drink red wine, there's no medical basis to take it up. Let's be very clear. But if you do, you don't have to be paranoid with all these ads about how apparently every glass is doing you harm. It isn't. It's going to harm some people, but not everybody. It's not that difficult. The Mediterranean diet does not contain fake meat. It does not contain much, if any, by way of processed packaged foods. And it's low in added sugars. Because if you're eating whole, WHOLE foods, they don't have added sugars. You don't have added sugar in a lamb chop. There's no added sugar in an apple. There's no added sugar in a cashew nut or a blueberry. We've spoken about this previously, but I think it really does bear repeating. The main foods we should be putting into our bodies are those that, until fairly recently, were either growing somewhere or moving around. This is what our ancestors ate for thousands of years. And the immediate argument is, oh, they didn't live as long as we did. Well, they weren't dying of the chronic diseases that we get today. So it wasn't their diets that were the problem. If there was a problem with their diets, they didn't have enough food, and that's still the problem in many parts of the world, but not in Western societies. Foods that, unless you either freeze them or eat them, will need to be thrown out probably by next week. So these are not foods that you can put in your pantry and eat in 3 years' time. Now, we live in the modern world. It's probably not realistic to say we can completely eliminate all processed and packaged foods, but we can minimise them, and we can certainly look to minimise the amount of added sugars that are in our foods, and part of that comes back to reading labels. Very simple calculation. If you want to know how much sugar is in a food, obviously you look at the label, it tells you the amount of sugars. Divide the number of grams by 4, and that will roughly give you the number of teaspoons. Classic case, a can of soft drink will typically have about 10 or 11 teaspoons of sugar. Most people will not, in fact, I've never seen anybody put 10 or 11 teaspoons of sugar into their cup of coffee or tea. And a can of soft drink has roughly the same volume. When you think about it in those terms, it actually becomes quite simple. And of course, the main liquid to put into your body is water. So, surprise, surprise, a healthy diet leads to healthy aging. In another, perhaps, surprise, multivitamins slow biological aging. And there's been a lot of work done on multivitamins over the years, and typically it gets knocked by the powers that be because, again, there's not much money in it. And it always amazes me how doctors tend to knock the idea of taking supplements. Now, a lot of people may get enough vitamins and minerals through their diet, but not everybody. And the problem with what are called daily allowances is that is the amount to not be deficient. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's optimum. Optimal and not to get deficiency are not the same. And different people may need different amounts of different vitamins and minerals, and the same person may need different amounts at different points through their life, depending what they're doing. But anyway, this Cosmos trial, which studied 950 people over a couple of years, looked at 5 epigenetic biomarkers of biological aging. Now, I'm not personally intimately familiar with these markers, but essentially it showed in the multivitamin group there was slower aging as measured by these biomarkers than in the placebo group. Now, it doesn't mean these people are going to live forever. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily not going to get illness. There's very little downside to taking a multivitamin. Now, some people are very happy to do this. Some people don't want to. It's to your individual circumstances, and different people will also have, as we touched before, different needs. So if you're low in iron, then you don't need a multivitamin, you need an iron supplement. If you're low in vitamin D, then probably it's a good idea to get a little bit of sunshine, but the other option is a vitamin D supplement versus a multivitamin. But a multivitamin does give you a little bit of the A to Z, and regardless of your diet, it just is not going to do you any harm. Again, there's always a rider. There's 8 billion people on the planet. Maybe some people are allergic to the colourings, and if that's the case, don't take it or find something else. But the amount of effort that goes into knocking multivitamins has always been something that causes me to scratch my head. So does everybody need to do it? No. Am I saying that's what you need to do? No. Is it something for you to consider in the context of your own circumstances? Yeah, absolutely. Bottom line, if you wouldn't put the wrong fuel into your car, why might you be putting the wrong fuels into your body? And if you are, then there's a very, very simple solution, and that's look at what you're taking in through the course of the day or week and look to make some changes. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.